the rhythm of a day long ago. Long before cities rose above rivers and plains, before farms carved neat fields across the land, human life moved according to a slower and more patient rhythm. The world was wider then, quieter in many places, shaped mainly by wind, animals, forests, and the steady passage of seasons. Small groups of early humans lived within this immense landscape. They did not experience the day through clocks or schedules. Instead, light, temperature, and the movement of animals guided the structure of their lives. A single day unfolded gradually, filled with many small tasks that together ensured survival. Morning often began before the sun had fully climbed above the horizon. The first light appeared softly along distant hills or across open plains. In colder regions, the air carried a faint chill that clung to the ground through the early hours. A thin mist might drift along rivers where water still held the coolness of night. Early humans usually slept close together within temporary shelters or near the warmth of a fire that had burned slowly through the darkness. Some shelters were simple windbreaks made from branches and animal skins. Others were small huts built from wood, grass, or reeds depending on the surrounding environment. As the sky brightened, people gradually stirred. The fire was often the first concern of the morning. If embers remained beneath the ashes, someone would carefully add dry twigs and grass to bring the flames back to life. Fire was one of the most valuable tools early humans possessed. It provided warmth, protection from predators, light during darkness, and the ability to cook food. Maintaining it required constant attention. Once the fire crackled again, others began moving about the camp. Some stretched stiff limbs after sleeping on the ground or on bedding made from leaves and animal hides. The sounds of the waking world surrounded them. Birds calling from trees, insects humming softly, distant animals moving through grass or brush. Morning tasks often began quietly. Water had to be gathered if the group had camped away from a river or stream. Containers made from hollow gourds, woven baskets sealed with resin, or animal skins were used to carry water back to the campsite. Meanwhile, another member of the group might check the area nearby for signs of animals that had passed during the night. Tracks pressed into soft soil could reveal which creatures had traveled through the landscape. Fresh footprints suggested opportunities for hunting later in the day. Early humans paid careful attention to these subtle clues. Survival depended on noticing small details within the environment. Food was not always plentiful, and gathering it required knowledge built over generations. Every landscape offered different possibilities. In wooded areas, people searched for nuts, berries, edible roots, and wild fruits that grew beneath the trees. These plants appeared only during certain seasons, so memory played an important role. Individuals learned which locations produced reliable harvests each year. On open grasslands, herds of grazing animals moved constantly across large distances. Hunters studied their patterns carefully, learning the routes animals followed when searching for water or fresh vegetation. Morning was often the best time to begin a hunt. The air remained cool, and animals were still active after feeding during the night. Hunters prepared simple but effective tools before leaving the camp. Spears tipped with sharpened stone points were among the most common weapons. Some groups also used throwing sticks or early forms of spear throwers that increased distance and force. These tools were the result of remarkable skill. Stone toolmaking required patience and practice. By striking one rock against another in precise ways, early humans shaped sharp flakes and edges from materials such as flint, obsidian, or quartzite. These pieces could then be attached to wooden shafts using plant fibers, tree resin, or sinew from animals. The process demanded concentration and experience. While hunters prepared for the day, others focused on gathering plant foods. This work was just as important as hunting. In many environments, plant foods formed the majority of daily calories. Gatherers carried woven baskets or slings made from fibers stripped from plants. As they moved through the landscape, they carefully searched for edible leaves, seeds, mushrooms, and tubers hidden beneath the soil. Knowledge guided their movements. Certain plants looked similar to poisonous species, so identifying them correctly was essential. Over many generations, communities developed a deep understanding of local ecosystems. Children learned these lessons by accompanying adults during daily activities. Education happened naturally through observation. Young members of the group watched how tools were made, how tracks were interpreted, and how plants were collected. No written instructions existed. Instead, knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next through shared experience. Back at the camp, a few individuals usually remained behind. These might include older members of the group whose knowledge remained valuable even if they no longer traveled long distances. They might repair tools, weave baskets, or prepare hides from animals hunted during previous days. Animal hides required careful treatment to become useful materials. First, any remaining flesh had to be scraped away using stone blades. Then the hide might be stretched across a wooden frame and rubbed with fats. Once treated, hides became clothing, blankets, or coverings for shelters. As the sun climbed higher, activity across the landscape increased. Hunters moved quietly through tall grass or along forest edges, scanning the distance for movement. They communicated through subtle gestures, avoiding loud sounds that might alert animals. If a herd appeared within reach, patience became essential. Hunters studied the wind direction to avoid carrying their scent toward the animals. Sometimes they waited for long periods before attempting to approach. Other times they worked together to guide animals toward natural barriers such as cliffs, narrow valleys, or rivers where escape became difficult. A successful hunt did not happen every day. Often, hunters returned with nothing more than observations about where animals had traveled. Yet, even unsuccessful hunts provided valuable information that helped future efforts. Meanwhile, gatherers continued moving steadily through forests or meadows. Baskets slowly filled with berries, seeds, or roots dug carefully from the soil using wooden sticks. These activities required endurance rather than speed. Gathering often involved many hours of walking and searching. Along the way, people noticed countless details within their surroundings. Bird nests hidden among branches, animal burrows beneath shrubs, fresh tracks along muddy riverbanks. Each observation added to the mental map individuals carried within their minds. By midday, the sun stood high in the sky. The heat of the day sometimes slowed activity, especially in warmer regions. Hunters and gatherers might pause beneath shade trees or beside streams to drink water and rest briefly. Food gathered earlier could be eaten during these breaks. Fresh berries, nuts, or edible leaves provided energy to continue the day's work. Meat from previous hunts might also be carried along, preserved through drying or smoking over fire. Even these quiet moments where tools were adjusted, damaged points repaired, or new stone flakes shaped while resting. Early humans constantly maintained their equipment because reliable tools made survival easier. As the afternoon approached, groups gradually began returning toward their campsite. The path back might follow rivers or familiar landmarks such as large rock formations, distinct the long afternoon. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the landscape had changed its character. Morning coolness had faded, replaced by warmth that settled over plains, forests, and river valleys. Shadows shortened beneath trees, and the steady rhythm of insects filled the air. For early human communities moving through these environments, midday rarely meant complete rest. Instead, activity shifted into slower and more deliberate tasks suited to the heat of the day. Groups traveling across open terrain often sought temporary shade. A stand of acacia trees on the savanna, a cluster of tall reeds beside a riverbank, or a rocky overhang along a hillside could provide shelter from the direct glare of the sun. These pauses were practical rather than idle. People used the time to inspect tools, examine gathered foods, and quietly observe the surrounding landscape. Observation played a central role in daily life. Even while resting, individuals watched the behavior of animals and the movement of birds across the sky. Circling vultures might suggest a recent kill made by predators. The distant alarm calls of antelope could reveal the presence of large carnivores nearby. Every detail contributed to a deeper understanding of the world around them. During these midday hours, gatherers sometimes explored areas slightly farther from the campsite than they had earlier in the morning. Certain plants became easier to identify once sunlight illuminated the forest floor. Roots and tubers hidden beneath soil could be found by recognizing subtle changes in the shape of leaves or the texture of the ground. Digging sticks proved useful for this work. These simple tools were usually made from sturdy branches that had been sharpened and hardened in fire. With patient effort, the stick could loosen soil around buried roots without damaging them. Many of these plants contained valuable nutrients that sustained communities during times when meat was scarce. In river valleys and wetlands, other opportunities appeared. Edible aquatic plants grew in shallow water, their stems and seeds collected carefully by those familiar with the environment. Shellfish could be gathered along muddy banks where freshwater mussels buried themselves beneath the sediment. Even insects provided nourishment in some regions, especially larvae hidden within decaying wood. While gatherers continued their quiet work, hunters often followed slower trails during the afternoon. The intense heat of midday made many animals less active, encouraging them to rest in shaded areas or near water sources. This behavior allowed hunters to approach more closely if they moved carefully and remained downwind. Tracking required patience that could stretch for hours. A broken twig, a patch of flattened grass, or a faint indentation in dust might reveal the direction an animal had taken earlier. Experienced trackers interpreted these signs almost as if they were reading a story written across the ground. Sometimes the trail led through surprising terrain. A herd might pass from grassland into forest, then descend toward a river where footprints disappeared along the water's edge. In such moments, hunters relied on intuition shaped by years of experience. They imagined where the animals would travel next based on weather, food availability, and previous patterns. Success did not depend solely on strength or speed. Knowledge of behavior proved just as important. Certain species followed predictable routes between feeding areas and water sources. Others moved according to seasonal migrations that could stretch across hundreds of miles. Early humans memorized these patterns through careful observation repeated over many years. Meanwhile, life continued within the campsite itself. Those who had remained behind rarely sat idle. Many practical tasks filled the afternoon hours. One common activity involved the repair of stone tools used for cutting, scraping, and shaping materials. Over time, the edges of these tools dulled through constant use. Restoring their sharpness required skilled flaking techniques that removed tiny fragments from the stone. This process often took place near flat surfaces where flakes could be collected and reused. Some pieces became smaller cutting implements, while others served as sharp points for new tools. Nothing valuable was wasted. Even the smallest fragment might prove useful when attached to a wooden handle with plant fibers or sinew. Another important responsibility involved preparing plant fibers for weaving. Certain grasses, reeds, and bark fibers could be twisted together into strong cords. These cords formed the foundation of nets, slings, carrying straps, and baskets. The weaving process demanded patience. Fibers were softened by soaking them in water, then twisted gradually between fingers and palms until they formed long strands. Several strands could be braided together to create thicker rope capable of carrying heavy loads. Basket weaving developed into a remarkably refined skill within many early human communities. By carefully bending flexible branches and interlacing plant fibers, individuals produced containers strong enough to hold gathered foods or transport water-resistant materials. These baskets allowed groups to collect larger quantities of food during foraging trips. They also helped organize supplies within the camp, ensuring that valuable items such as tools, dried meat, or medicinal plants remained protected. Children often played nearby while adults worked. Their activities were not entirely separate from the tasks of the group. Even games sometimes reflected the skills they would need later in life. Small sticks might be thrown at imaginary targets, mimicking the motion of hunting spears. Stones were stacked or arranged into patterns that resembled the early stages of toolmaking. Through play and observation, younger members gradually absorbed knowledge about survival in the natural world. In many environments, the afternoon also provided time for processing materials collected during previous days. Animal bones from earlier hunts could be shaped into awls, needles, or small hooks used for fishing. The dense structure of bone made it an excellent material for tools requiring precision. Hollow bones also served as containers for pigments gathered from natural sources. Red ochre, yellow clay, and charcoal could be ground into powder and mixed with animal fat to create paint-like substances. These pigments had many uses, including body decoration, marking objects, and possibly symbolic purposes connected to rituals or storytelling. Nearby rivers and lakes provided another valuable resource: fish. Fishing methods varied depending on the environment. In shallow streams, individuals sometimes used woven traps placed along narrow channels where fish were forced to swim through small openings. In deeper water, sharpened spears allowed quick strikes when fish approached the surface. Some communities constructed simple barriers using branches and stones, directing fish toward areas where they could be easily captured. These techniques demonstrated a careful understanding of water currents and fish behavior. As the afternoon slowly advanced toward evening, the entire landscape seemed to soften. Birdsong changed as different species became active. The angle of sunlight lengthened shadows across the ground, bringing relief from the earlier heat. Breezes often returned as the air cooled, carrying the scent of distant vegetation or water. Hunters began making their way back toward camp, whether they had succeeded or not. Their return paths often followed familiar landmarks: a fallen tree shaped like a fork, a ridge that curved toward the horizon, or a river bend marked by tall reeds. Gatherers also turned back with baskets filled according to the fortunes of the day. Some carried bundles of firewood collected along the way. Dry branches remained essential for maintaining the campfire through the night. Approaching the campsite, the sounds of daily activity grew clearer. Children moved between shelters while adults prepared spaces for processing the gathered food. The fire was stirred once more, fresh wood added to create steady flames suitable for cooking. Soon the scattered members of the group gathered together again within the firelight and the quiet work of evening. As daylight slowly withdrew from the land, the atmosphere surrounding the campsite began to change. The golden tones of late afternoon deepened into soft amber and then into dim blue shadows that spread across the ground. Birds that had filled the air with sound throughout the day gradually quieted as they returned to their nests. Insects replaced them, their steady rhythm rising from grasses and trees as darkness approached. For early human communities, evening marked neither the end of activity nor the beginning of sleep. Instead, it opened a quieter period of work, reflection, and social connection centered around the glow of firelight. The fire had already been revived as members of the group returned from their journeys across the landscape. Dry branches gathered earlier were placed carefully onto the coals, producing steady flames that pushed back the growing darkness. Smoke drifted upward, carrying the scent of burning wood through the still air. Nearby, gathered foods were sorted and prepared. Roots and tubers dug from the soil during the afternoon required cleaning before they could be cooked. Soil clinging to their surfaces was brushed away using hands or small bundles of grass. Some roots were sliced with stone blades, exposing pale interiors that softened once heated. Berries collected in woven baskets were examined carefully. Soft fruits that had been crushed during travel were separated from those that remained intact. Seeds and nuts were cracked open using smooth stones, revealing edible kernels hidden within hard shells. Fish caught earlier in nearby streams or lakes were cleaned beside the fire. Stone knives opened the bodies with precise cuts, removing organs and scales. Once prepared, the fish could be roasted directly over the flames or placed on flat stones warmed by the fire's heat. When a hunt had been successful, the evening work expanded considerably. Large animals brought back to camp required careful processing so that none of the valuable resources were wasted. Thick hides were removed using sharp flakes of stone. Meat was cut into manageable portions, some intended for immediate cooking while other pieces were prepared for preservation. Drying meat became an important method of storing food for later days. Thin strips were hung on wooden frames near the fire where gentle warmth and smoke slowly removed moisture. This process could take many hours, sometimes continuing through the night, but it allowed communities to carry food during long journeys. Bones were also kept for future use. Strong leg bones contained marrow rich in nutrients. Once the meat had been removed, these bones could be cracked open using heavy stones, revealing the soft substance inside. Other bones were saved for tools. Their dense structure made them useful for shaping needles, awls, and points used in many daily tasks. As these activities unfolded, the campsite gradually filled with the warm glow of firelight. Flames reflected on nearby surfaces, the polished edge of a stone blade, the smooth curve of a bone tool, the woven patterns of baskets resting beside the ground. Shadows flickered across shelters made from branches and hides, shifting gently with every movement of the fire. The evening meal slowly took form. Roots roasted in the ashes softened and released earthy aromas. Meat cooked over the flames, its surface darkening as fat dripped into the fire below. Fish placed on hot stones crackled softly as their flesh became firm. Food was shared among members of the group, often distributed in ways shaped by long-standing customs. Those who had hunted or gathered might receive particular portions, yet cooperation ensured that everyone benefited from the day's efforts. Although early human communication did not resemble the structured languages of later societies, gestures, expressions, and simple sounds carried meaning. These signals allowed individuals to share observations from the day's journeys, the location of a herd spotted in distant grasslands, the discovery of a patch of edible plants near a stream, or signs of predators moving through nearby terrain. Information spread gradually through these exchanges, shaping plans for the following day. Even after the meal ended, the evening remained active. Some individuals continued working with tools illuminated by the fire's glow. Stone knapping, the process of shaping sharp edges from rock, often took place during these hours. The quiet tapping of stone against stone produced small flakes that scattered across the ground. Each strike required careful control. A misplaced blow could shatter the entire piece, wasting valuable material. Skilled toolmakers developed a sense of rhythm through long practice, guiding each movement with precision. Nearby, others prepared hides collected during previous hunts. The surface of a fresh hide contained layers of tissue that had to be removed before the material could become flexible. Using scrapers fashioned from stone, individuals worked steadily across the skin, cleaning it with repeated strokes. Once the surface was smooth, the hide might be stretched between wooden stakes placed in the ground. As it dried, fats or plant extracts could be rubbed into the fibers to soften them, preventing the material from becoming brittle. This process transformed raw animal skin into useful clothing or coverings for shelters. Clothing itself varied widely depending on the environment. In colder regions, multiple layers of hide provided insulation against freezing temperatures. In warmer climates, lighter coverings made from plant fibers or many garments were secured using bone needles and sinew thread. Creating these tools required remarkable patience. Bone fragments were shaped carefully into slender forms with pointed ends, then polished until smooth enough to pass through hide without tearing it. These evening hours also offered opportunities for creating objects that held meaning beyond immediate survival. Pieces of bone or stone might be carved into simple shapes. Shells collected from distant shores could be pierced and strung together into ornaments. Pigments ground earlier in the day were sometimes applied to objects or even to the skin. Such decorations may have carried symbolic significance within early human groups. Patterns painted across the body or carved into tools might represent group identity, personal achievements, or connections to the surrounding environment. In some locations, evidence of artistic expression extended even further. Caves provided sheltered spaces where individuals occasionally created images on stone walls using pigments mixed with animal fat or water. Shapes resembling animals, handprints, and abstract markings appeared in many regions of the world, suggesting that creative expression formed part of human life even during these distant periods. Back at the campsite, younger members of the group remained awake long after the meal ended. They observed the work of older individuals, learning how tools were shaped and how materials were prepared. Some practiced simple tasks themselves under watchful guidance, twisting plant fibers into cord, sharpening small sticks, or arranging stones around the fire. Learning unfolded gradually through participation. Knowledge passed not through formal instruction, but through shared activity repeated across countless evenings. Meanwhile, the natural world surrounding the campsite shifted as night deepened. Nocturnal animals began moving through the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. The distant call of an owl echoed through forested valleys. Small mammals rustled through fallen leaves while searching for food. Fire served as protection against many of these creatures. Its light and smoke discouraged predators from approaching too closely. For this reason, maintaining the flames remained essential throughout the night. Individuals sometimes took turns adding wood to the fire, ensuring that the coals never faded completely. Above the campsite, the sky gradually filled with stars. Without artificial lights to dim their brightness, the night sky appeared vast and deeply detailed. Patterns formed by clusters of stars became familiar landmarks, guiding travelers during long journeys across open landscapes. These celestial shapes may also have held deeper significance within early human cultures, though the exact meanings remain unknown. As the hours passed, fatigue slowly settled across the camp. Tools were placed aside. The final tasks of the evening came to an end. One by one, individuals prepared places to sleep, often near the warmth of the fire. Some rested on bedding made from grasses or leaves gathered earlier in the day. Others wrapped themselves in animal hides that provided comfort against the cooling air. The fire continued to glow quietly as the group drifted into sleep. Yet even during the stillness of night, the world beyond the camp remained alive with movement, setting the stage for another dawn and another day shaped by the patient rhythm of early human life. The quiet world before dawn. Long before the first light appeared along the horizon, the landscape surrounding the campsite remained suspended in a calm and watchful dark. Without the interference of artificial light, stars appeared bright and sharply defined. Long arcs of constellations stretched from one edge of the horizon to the other. Over many generations, early humans became deeply familiar with these patterns. Traveling at night was sometimes necessary, especially during long seasonal migrations across open land. In those moments, the position of stars offered reliable orientation when landmarks were difficult to see. Back within the camp, the glowing embers slowly released warmth into the surrounding air. A few individuals stirred briefly during the night. Someone might adjust a hide covering or shift position on a bed of leaves. Another might rise quietly to drink water from a nearby container made from animal skin or a hollow gourd. These small movements were part of the natural cycle of rest. Sleep rarely occurred in a single uninterrupted stretch. Instead, it often unfolded in phases, with periods of quiet wakefulness in between. During these moments, individuals sometimes observed the fire or listened to distant sounds drifting across the landscape. Gradually, subtle changes began to appear in the eastern sky. At first, the darkness simply softened. The deepest black tones gave way to faint shades of gray that spread slowly upward. Stars near the horizon faded one by one as the earliest hint of dawn approached. Birds were often the first creatures to sense the approaching light. A single call might echo from the branches of a nearby tree, followed by another from farther away. These sounds spread gradually across the environment as more birds began their morning activity. Within the camp, the person closest to the fire noticed these changes. The embers were stirred again, and a few small twigs were added carefully. Flames returned with a soft crackling sound, pushing back the lingering darkness around the campsite. Soon others began. Morning did not arrive suddenly, but unfolded through a sequence of small moments. Someone sat upright and stretched stiff arms after a night of rest. Another brushed dew from a hide covering before standing to warm hands near the fire. The air remained cool, carrying the scent of damp soil and vegetation. As light continued spreading across the sky, the outlines of the surrounding terrain became clearer. Nearby trees emerged gradually from shadow. The distant edge of a river or hillside appeared as a pale shape against the growing brightness. Morning activity resumed quietly. The fire needed steady fuel, So individuals walked short distances from the camp to gather fallen branches left behind from earlier days. Dry would produce the best flames, and experienced members of the group quickly recognized which pieces would burn effectively. Water was another early priority. If the campsite lay near a stream or river, someone carried containers to refill them before the day's movement began. These containers varied widely depending on the region. Some were made from woven plant fibers lined with resin to prevent leakage. Others used animal stomachs or skins tied securely at the opening. The short walk to the water's edge often revealed fresh information about the environment. Animal tracks imprinted in soft mud during the night offered clues about creatures that had passed nearby. The distinctive shape of hoofprints might indicate grazing animals approaching the river after dark. The wide paw marks of a predator suggested a different story entirely. Such discoveries influenced the plans for the coming day. Meanwhile, others prepared simple morning meals using food gathered or preserved earlier. Dried meat could be warmed briefly near the fire. Nuts and seeds stored in baskets were cracked open and shared among the group. In some environments, edible plants were collected directly around the campsite before leaving for longer journeys. Tender shoots growing after seasonal rains offered a fresh source of nourishment. Morning also provided an ideal time to inspect and organize equipment. Spears leaned against a tree or rested near the fire where they had been placed the night before. Each one was examined carefully. Stone points were checked for damage, and bindings made from sinew or plant fibers were tightened if necessary. A broken point could be replaced quickly using spare stone flakes carried for that purpose. Carrying equipment efficiently remained important for groups that traveled frequently. Many tools were lightweight and multifunctional, designed to serve several purposes rather than a single specialized task. Baskets were inspected as well. Gatherers ensured that their woven containers remained strong enough to hold food collected during the day. If a section had loosened or broken, plant fibers could be added quickly to repair the structure. Children often assisted with these preparations. Small tasks offered opportunities to practice skills they would need as adults. Collecting kindling, carrying lightweight containers, or helping sort tools allowed them to participate in the daily rhythm of the group. By the time the sun finally appeared above the horizon, the campsite had already returned to full activity. Warm golden light spread across the ground, illuminating grasses sparkling with dew. Mist lifted slowly from nearby water, revealing reflections of trees and sky along the surface. The day's journeys were about to begin again. Hunters observed the direction of the wind before setting out. Understanding air movement helped them approach animals without revealing their scent. Gatherers discussed the locations they planned to explore, remembering where plants had grown successfully during previous seasons. Each person carried knowledge shaped by many past experiences. The land itself acted as a vast memory. Hills, rivers, groves of trees, and rocky outcrops all held information about where food, water, or shelter might be found. Leaving the campsite required quiet organization. Tools were gathered. Baskets were lifted onto shoulders using braided straps. Spears were balanced carefully for long walks through forests or across open plains. Before departing, the fire was managed carefully. Large flames were reduced to glowing embers that could remain alive for many hours. A few thicker pieces moving through the land. Once the camp gradually emptied and the morning light strengthened across the landscape, small groups began spreading outward in several directions. Their movements were rarely random. Paths developed through memory rather than through visible trails, shaped by years of observation and seasonal experience. The land surrounding them was not an unfamiliar wilderness, but a living map filled with meaning. Each hill, stream, grove of trees, or open meadow carried practical significance. Certain places offered reliable water even during dry months. Other areas produced wild fruits only during brief periods of the year. Rocky outcrops provided shelter during sudden storms. Early humans moved through this environment with a quiet awareness of these details. Gatherers often followed routes that wound gently along riverbanks or across forest edges. Rivers acted as natural guides. Their steady flow offered drinking water and attracted animals, birds, and fish. Plants growing near water also tended to be more abundant and diverse than those found in drier areas. Along the banks, tall grasses rustled softly in the morning breeze. Small birds darted between reeds while insects hovered above the surface of slow-moving pools. The ground here often felt softer beneath bare feet, or simple footwear made from animal hide. Certain plants growing near rivers held special value. Wild grains sometimes appeared in open patches of soil where seasonal flooding had left behind nutrient-rich sediment. Individuals carefully cut these grasses using sharp stone flakes, collecting the seeds inside baskets for later use. These early grains were not yet cultivated crops, but their presence offered a dependable food source when gathered in sufficient quantities. Farther from the water, wooded regions provided a different collection of resources. Trees produced nuts encased in thick shells that required effort to open. Fallen logs created shelter for insects and small animals hiding beneath the bark. Mushrooms grew in shaded areas where moisture remained trapped beneath layers of leaves. Identifying edible varieties demanded careful attention. Experience guided these decisions. Certain colors, shapes, or smells signaled which mushrooms were safe to eat and which could cause illness. Knowledge of these differences formed part of the shared wisdom within each community. While gatherers moved slowly through vegetation, hunters often traveled greater distances across open ground. Grasslands stretched widely in some regions, dotted with scattered trees that offered occasional shade. These environments supported large herds of grazing animals whose migrations shaped the daily strategies of human groups. Tracking across grassland required a different set of skills. Unlike forests where broken branches or disturbed leaves revealed recent movement, open plains demanded attention to subtle patterns in the grass itself. A narrow line of bent stems could indicate where animals had passed earlier. Slight depressions in soil revealed the weight of hooves pressing into the ground. Wind played a constant role in these environments. A shifting breeze could carry human scent across surprising distances. Hunters often paused frequently to test the air, adjusting their approach based on its direction. A sudden change might require circling widely to remain undetected. The journey toward a herd could take hours. During that time, the hunters studied not only the animals but the terrain itself. Valleys, rocky slopes, and riverbanks all influenced how a hunt might unfold. A narrow ravine could limit escape routes. A steep hill might slow running animals long enough for a well-timed spear throw. Such decisions were made quietly through observation and shared understanding. While hunting demanded patience and coordination, other members of the community focused on gathering resources that supported everyday life beyond food. In certain landscapes, stones suitable for toolmaking appeared only in specific locations. These deposits often became important destinations during seasonal travel. Groups visited them regularly to replenish supplies of sharp-edged rock used for blades and spear points. The process of selecting stone required careful inspection. Not every rock fractured in a predictable way. Flint, obsidian, and certain forms of chert were valued because they produced thin, sharp flakes when struck correctly. These materials sometimes occurred naturally along riverbeds or within exposed cliff faces. When a suitable piece was found, it might be shaped immediately or carried back toward camp for later work. Obsidian, a dark volcanic glass, proved especially useful where it was available. Its edges could become extraordinarily sharp, capable of cutting through hide and plant fibers with ease. However, its brittleness meant that tools made from it required cautious handling. In regions without access to such materials, early humans adapted by using whatever resources were present. Quartzite, basalt, and other stones served similar purposes even if they required different shaping techniques. Flexibility and experimentation allowed communities to adjust their tool-making traditions to the landscapes they inhabited. Beyond gathering stone, early humans also collected materials used for building and maintaining shelters. Flexible branches from young trees could be bent into curved frames that supported coverings made from hide or woven vegetation. Reeds gathered from wetlands were dried and bundled together to create thatched roofs capable of shedding rain. In colder climates, Thicker branches formed stronger frameworks for windbreaks that shielded camps from harm. Most early human groups moved frequently, following the seasonal availability of food and water. Their shelters were therefore designed for quick assembly and easy abandonment when the time came to travel again. Despite their temporary nature, these campsites often showed clear organization. Areas for cooking, tool-making, and sleeping were arranged thoughtfully to make daily activities easier. Fires were placed where smoke would drift away from shelters while still providing warmth and light. Children moving between these spaces gradually absorbed the patterns shaping camp life. Their curiosity led them to observe every process unfolding around them. One moment might involve watching an adult sharpen a stone blade with careful taps. Another moment might involve examining a plant newly gathered from the forest floor. Through these experiences, knowledge continued passing quietly from one generation to the next. Meanwhile, the wider landscape remained alive with activity. Animals grazed along distant ridges while birds circled high above the plains. Insects moved through tall grasses, pollinating flowers that would later produce seeds and fruit. The entire ecosystem functioned as a complex web in which early humans participated rather than dominated. Weather conditions also shaped the day's progress. A sudden shift in wind might bring clouds across the sky, casting moving shadows over the land. In warmer climates, distant thunder sometimes announced approaching storms long before rain arrived. When dark clouds gathered, groups adjusted their plans accordingly. Gatherers might begin returning earlier than expected, carrying baskets filled with whatever resources had been collected so far. Hunters observing changes in animal behavior might realize that herds were moving toward sheltered valleys where rain would be less intense. The ability to read these environmental signals allowed early humans to respond. As the day continued, the sun climbed steadily higher. Light reflected off river surfaces and illuminated the wide stretches of land through which people traveled. Footsteps left temporary marks in dust or damp soil, soon erased by wind, rain, or the movement of animals. Yet the memory of each journey remained within the minds of those who made it. Paths taken during one season might guide travel months later when conditions returned to a familiar pattern. Over time, this knowledge formed an invisible network of routes stretching across vast territories. Eventually, as the afternoon approached once more, individuals began turning back toward the campsite. Their baskets and tools carried the results of the day's exploration. Seasons of movement. As the sun lowered once again and the returning figures approached the familiar clearing of the campsite, the rhythm of life continued within a pattern far larger than a single day. Early human communities did not experience time only through sunrise and sunset. Their lives were shaped just as strongly by the steady turning of the seasons. The land itself changed throughout the year. Rivers that flowed calmly in one season could swell dramatically during periods of heavy rain. Meadows filled with flowers during warmer months eventually faded into dry grass when temperatures rose. Forests produced fruit and nuts only during brief windows before the branches grew quiet again. Because of this constant transformation, early humans rarely remained in one place for long periods. Movement allowed them to follow the shifting abundance of the natural world. When berries ripened in a particular valley, people traveled there to gather them. When herds of animals began migrating across open plains, hunters moved closer to the paths those animals followed. These journeys sometimes covered large distances. Across certain regions, groups traveled between landscapes that looked entirely different from one another. A community might spend part of the year near coastal waters rich with fish and shellfish, then move inland when seasonal plants began growing along rivers and hillsides. Such travel demanded careful planning. Knowledge passed through generations helped determine when it was time to leave one location and begin moving toward another. The appearance of certain birds, the blooming of particular plants, or the changing color of grasses all served as signals within the environment. Preparing for travel involved many small tasks. Shelters built from branches and hides were dismantled piece by piece. Materials that could be reused were packed carefully. Wooden poles supporting the structure might be carried if suitable replacements were scarce in the next destination. Baskets were filled with preserved food to sustain the group during the journey. Dried meat, nuts, and seeds provided nourishment when fresh resources were not immediately available. Containers made from animal skin stored water when rivers or streams lay far apart along the travel route. Once everything was prepared, the group set out across the landscape. Walking remained the primary method of movement. Some individuals carried heavy bundles using slings of woven fiber that rested across the shoulders. Others balanced baskets against their backs or hips. Children walked alongside adults, sometimes riding briefly on the backs of older family members when the terrain became difficult. The pace of travel was steady but not hurried. Stopping frequently allowed people to observe their surroundings and search for useful materials along the way. A fallen tree might provide dry wood suitable for tool handles. A patch of edible plants growing beside the path offered a chance to gather additional food. Even during long journeys, early humans rarely passed through the land without interacting with it. Rivers presented both opportunity and challenge during these travels. Crossing shallow streams could be simple when the water level remained low. However, larger rivers required careful consideration. Some communities constructed simple rafts from logs or bundles of reeds tied together with plant fibers. These floating platforms allowed people to carry supplies across calm sections of water. In other cases, groups moved along the riverbank until they discovered a natural crossing point where rocks created a stable path through the current. The process demanded patience and cooperation. Tools, baskets, and preserved food needed protection from the water. Individuals helped one another navigate slippery stones or shifting currents. Beyond rivers, other landscapes offered different obstacles. Mountainous terrain required slow movement along steep slopes where loose rocks shifted underfoot. Dense forests forced travelers to weave through tangled vegetation while watching carefully for hidden roots or fallen branches. Yet these environments also provided valuable resources. Mountain regions sometimes contained caves or rock shelters offering protection during storms. Forests supplied wood for tools, edible plants, and small animals that could be hunted when larger prey proved difficult to find. During extended journeys, temporary camps were established along the route. These resting places were simple and quickly assembled. A windbreak made from branches might be enough to block cold air during the night. Fires were lit using materials gathered nearby, providing warmth and a place to cook food. Even these brief camps reflected familiar patterns. Tools were placed within easy reach. Food supplies were organized carefully. Fires were arranged where smoke would drift safely away from sleeping areas. Once morning arrived again, the journey continued. These seasonal migrations often led to landscapes known through memory, yet rediscovered each year with fresh attention. A valley visited during previous generations might still contain the same stands of nut-bearing trees. A coastline might still reveal tidal pools filled with shellfish when the ocean withdrew during low tide. Returning to these places carried a sense of familiarity. The group already understood the layout of the land. They knew where fresh water could be found, where shelters could be built, and which areas offered the richest supply of food. Some locations, archaeological discoveries in many parts of the world reveal layers of ancient campsites where early humans returned again and again. Stone tools left behind in one generation were sometimes found and reused by later groups. These sites gradually accumulated traces of countless visits, fragments of bone, charcoal from fires, broken pieces of stone shaped during toolmaking. Within these returning journeys, another important aspect of life occasionally appeared. Different human groups sometimes encountered one another while moving through overlapping territories. These meetings could happen near rivers, along migration routes, or at locations where valuable resources were found. The presence of another group was often noticed through subtle signs: footprints in soft soil, smoke rising in the distance, or the remains of a recently used campsite. Interactions between groups varied widely. Some meetings likely involved cautious observation from a distance before either side approached closer. In other cases, individuals may have exchanged resources such as stone materials or food gathered from distant environments. Evidence discovered by archaeologists suggests that materials sometimes traveled hundreds of miles from their original sources. This movement hints at networks of interaction linking separate communities across vast regions. These encounters may also have allowed the sharing of knowledge. Techniques for shaping tools, locating certain plants, or navigating unfamiliar landscapes could spread gradually through contact between groups. Although much about these exchanges remains uncertain, they formed part of the broader human experience across ancient environments. Eventually, after days or even weeks of travel, the migrating group reached its seasonal destination. The landscape ahead might look different from the previous campsite, perhaps a wide river valley filled with tall grasses, or a forested hillside where fruit-bearing trees grew in abundance. Upon arrival, attention turned once more to the familiar process of building a new camp. Branches were gathered, fires were prepared, baskets were arranged near the center of activity. The daily rhythm that had shaped life in the previous location began again within this new environment. Morning journeys to gather food, careful observation of animal tracks, quiet evenings spent shaping tools beside the fire. All of these patterns continued within the ever-changing cycle of seasons. Yet within these movements across the land, something else gradually developed. Over many generations, the experience of travel itself deepened humanity's understanding of the natural world, forming a relationship with knowledge carried through generations. When a group finally settled for a time within a familiar valley or along the edge of a forest rich with food, the routines of daily life resumed with quiet steadiness. Yet beneath these routines lay something more enduring than the immediate needs of hunting, gathering, or shelter building. Early human life depended not only on physical effort, but also on the steady accumulation of knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next. This knowledge was not written or recorded in symbols. Instead, it lived within memory, observation, and shared experience. Each person carried a portion of it, shaped by their own journeys through the land. Together, these individual understandings formed a collective awareness of the world surrounding them. Children played a central role in this process. From their earliest years, they followed adults through forests, across riverbanks, and along open plains. Their presence was not simply tolerated, but woven naturally into the rhythm of daily tasks. Through watching and participating, they slowly absorbed the countless details necessary for survival. Learning unfolded gradually through repeated exposure. When gatherers searched for edible plants, children noticed the shape of leaves and the scent of crushed stems. They observed how roots were loosened carefully from the soil and how fruits were examined before being placed into baskets. Mistakes became opportunities for correction rather than punishment. The complexity of the natural world required patience and continuous learning. Meanwhile, young members of the group also observed the preparation of tools. Stone toolmaking remained one of the most important skills within early human societies. The shaping of a useful blade required an understanding of the hidden structure inside each stone. Striking at the correct angle allowed thin flakes to separate cleanly, forming edges sharp enough to cut through hide or plant fiber. This technique could not be mastered quickly. Years of practice gradually refined the ability to judge where each strike should land. Young observers sometimes began by collecting small stone fragments and experimenting with their own attempts at shaping edges. Nearby, adults demonstrated the proper handling of hammerstones used to control each impact. Through repetition, the sounds of tapping stone became familiar within the campsite. Knowledge extended far beyond toolmaking. Seasonal awareness formed another essential part of early human understanding. The timing of plant growth, animal migration, and weather patterns influenced nearly every decision about movement and resource gathering. Older members of the group often possessed the deepest knowledge of these cycles. Having witnessed many years of seasonal change, they recognized subtle signals within the environment that others might overlook. The return of certain birds might indicate that fish would soon gather in nearby rivers. The flowering of a particular plant could signal that fruits in another region were about to ripen. Such observations guided decisions about when to travel and where to search for food. Even small changes in temperature or wind direction might carry meaning. Experienced individuals learned to read these signals through long familiarity with the land. Within the camp itself, evenings often became moments when this knowledge quietly circulated among the group. While tools were repaired or baskets woven near the fire, stories of past journeys and discoveries sometimes unfolded through gestures, expressions, and shared memory. These recollections preserved valuable information about distant landscapes, hidden water sources, and locations where food had once been abundant. Although the exact form of these exchanges remains unknown, archaeological evidence suggests that early humans possessed rich traditions of cultural transmission. Artifacts found across distant regions reveal striking similarities in tool design, suggesting that techniques spread gradually between communities. Decorative objects carved from bone or stone also appear in many areas, indicating that creativity and symbolism formed part of daily life. Artistic expression sometimes extended beyond portable objects. Caves and rock shelters provided surfaces where images were created using pigments derived from minerals and charcoal. Shapes resembling animals, human figures, and abstract patterns appear in these ancient artworks. The creation of such images required preparation and skill. Pigments were ground carefully into fine powder and mixed with animal fat or plant oils to produce paint. Brushes made from animal hair or plant fibers allowed precise application to stone surfaces. These activities suggest that early human communities engaged in forms of expression that reached beyond immediate survival needs. Some locations show evidence of repeated visits over many generations. Within these places, layers of charcoal and tool fragments accumulate gradually beneath the soil. Each layer represents a moment when people gathered there to share food, shape tools, or rest during long journeys across the landscape. Returning to these sites may have strengthened connections between past and present. Familiar landmarks within the terrain also carried deep meaning. A tall rock formation rising above the plains, a large tree beside a river bend, or a cave hidden within a hillside could become a point of orientation remembered by many generations. These landmarks help travelers navigate wide territories without written maps. The mental maps carried within human memory were remarkably detailed. Paths between important locations were recalled through experience and shared repeatedly within the group. Over time, entire networks of routes connected. Such knowledge allowed communities to move confidently through environments that might appear overwhelming to an unfamiliar traveler. Beyond practical survival, early human societies also developed strong bonds within their social groups. Cooperation formed the foundation of daily life. Food gathered or hunted during the day was commonly shared among the community. Individuals relied on one another for protection, support during illness, and assistance in raising children. This shared responsibility strengthened relationships within the group. Care for injured or elderly members appears in archaeological evidence as well. Skeletal remains show individuals who survived serious injuries or physical limitations that would have made solitary survival impossible. Such findings suggest that compassion and cooperation played meaningful roles within early human communities. Communication also continued evolving. Although the exact structure of early languages remains unknown, humans gradually developed more complex systems of sound and gesture to convey ideas. These systems allowed the sharing of increasingly detailed information about the environment and social life. Through communication, knowledge became easier to preserve across generations. During daily tasks such as hunting or gathering, subtle signals allowed coordination between individuals. A raised hand, a shift in posture, or a quiet sound could guide group movement without disturbing nearby animals. These forms of communication strengthened collaboration during difficult activities. Over many thousands of years, the gradual expansion of human populations led communities to explore new territories far beyond their ancestral homelands. Groups crossed deserts, climbed mountain ranges, and followed coastlines that stretched across enormous distances. Each new environment presented unfamiliar challenges, but also fresh opportunities for discovery. Within these expanding journeys, knowledge continued to grow. New plant species were identified as food sources. Different animals were studied and hunted using adapted techniques. Innovative tools emerged to suit the materials available in each region. The human relationship with the natural world became increasingly complex. Yet despite these changes, the rhythm of daily life remained grounded in the same essential pattern, that is, the slow turning toward a new way of life. Across thousands of years, the rhythm of early human life continued repeating through countless landscapes. Camps rose and disappeared beside rivers, along coastlines, and beneath the shelter of hills. Generations were born, grew into adulthood, and eventually passed their knowledge to those who followed. Yet the natural world itself never remained completely unchanged. Gradual shifts in climate slowly transformed the environments through which human communities moved. Glaciers that once stretched across vast northern regions began to retreat as temperatures warmed. Rivers altered their courses as melting ice fed new waterways. Forests expanded into areas that had previously been cold, open plains. These changes influenced the availability of animals and plants that people depended upon. Large herds of grazing animals that once roamed widely across colder grasslands began altering their migration routes as vegetation patterns shifted. Some species gradually disappeared from regions where they had once been abundant. In their place, smaller animals adapted to warmer climates became more common. Early humans responded to these transformations with the same careful observation that had guided their lives for generations. Instead of relying primarily on massive herds moving across the plains, hunters increasingly pursued a wider range of animals. Deer, wild goats, boar, and smaller mammals became important sources of meat in many areas. Hunting techniques adapted accordingly. Large cooperative hunts designed to surround enormous herds gradually gave way to quieter tracking methods suited for animals that traveled alone or in smaller groups. Hunters moved through forests with patience, studying faint tracks beneath fallen leaves or soft soil. Spears remained valuable tools, but new technologies also appeared. One important development involved the creation of spear-throwing devices that extended the reach of the hunter's arm. These tools allowed projectiles to travel farther and strike with greater force, increasing the chances of a successful hunt from a safer distance. Stone tools themselves continued evolving. Earlier heavy hand tools gradually gave way to smaller, more specialized blades crafted from carefully shaped flakes. These lighter tools proved easier to carry during long journeys and allowed more precise work when preparing food, shaping wood, or cutting plant fibers. Meanwhile, gathering activities also expanded in complexity. As human communities explored forests and valleys that had grown richer with plant life, they encountered a remarkable variety of edible species. Seeds, grains, fruits, and tubers appeared across many regions in predictable seasonal cycles. Over time, gatherers began recognizing that certain plants tended to grow repeatedly in the same areas. When seeds fell from harvested plants, new growth sometimes appeared during the following season. This simple observation gradually introduced a new possibility within human life. Instead of only collecting plants where they happened to grow naturally, people could encourage useful plants to appear in particular places. At first, this change occurred subtly. Seeds dropped intentionally near campsites might sprout the following year. Clearing competing vegetation around certain plants allowed them to grow more strongly. These small actions slowly influenced the surrounding environment. Such practices did not yet resemble full agriculture, but they represented an important shift in how humans interacted with the land. Rather than simply moving through landscapes in search of resources, people began shaping those landscapes in small but meaningful ways. Fishing techniques also became more. Communities living near lakes, rivers, or coastal waters developed tools specifically designed for capturing aquatic animals. Bone hooks attached to lines made from twisted plant fibers allowed fish to be caught individually. In other places, woven nets were created by carefully knotting plant cords into wide mesh patterns. These nets could trap multiple fish at once when placed in areas where water currents carried them along narrow channels. Shellfish gathering expanded along coastal regions as well. During low tides, rocky shorelines revealed pools filled with clams, oysters, and other marine life. These resources required little equipment to collect and provided reliable nourishment throughout much of the year. As access to such resources became better understood, some communities began returning to certain coastal sites more frequently. These repeated visits gradually produced camps that remained occupied for longer periods of time than earlier temporary settlements. Evidence of these longer stays appears in archaeological discoveries. Large accumulations of shells, bones, and tool fragments sometimes form layered mounds near ancient campsites. Each layer represents meals shared and activities performed across many seasons. These sites reveal how daily routines slowly adapted to new opportunities presented by changing environments. Another transformation involved the development of storage techniques. In earlier times, food was typically consumed shortly after it was gathered or hunted. However, as people discovered ways to preserve resources more effectively, storing food for later use became increasingly possible. Drying meat and fish remained one of the most common methods. Grains and seeds, once collected, could also be stored inside tightly woven baskets or containers made from clay-like earth hardened by fire. These containers protected valuable food supplies from insects and moisture. With reliable storage available, communities gained greater flexibility in their daily activities. Food gathered during times of abundance could support the group during periods when resources were more difficult to find. This gradual security allowed people to remain in one location for longer stretches. Settlements still shifted according to seasonal needs, but some places began serving as recurring centers where groups returned year after year. These locations often offered several advantages at once. Reliable water sources flowed nearby. Diverse plant life provided food throughout different seasons. Animals passed through the region during predictable migrations. Within such environments, human communities continued refining the skills that had supported them for millennia. Stone tool production became increasingly precise. Bone and antler materials were shaped into specialized tools designed for sewing, fishing, or carving wood. Artistic expression also continued developing. Small carvings representing animals or human figures appeared in certain regions. Patterns etched onto bone or stone objects hinted at symbolic traditions whose meanings remain uncertain today. These creative works suggest that early humans viewed their world not only through the lens of survival, but also through imagination and cultural identity. Meanwhile, social connections between different groups gradually expanded. Occasional meetings between communities allowed materials and ideas to travel across wide distances. Shells from coastal areas sometimes appeared far inland. Stone suitable for toolmaking was carried across regions where such materials did not naturally occur. These exchanges linked separate populations through networks of interaction that stretched far beyond individual camps. Within these evolving relationships, humanity continued building a deeper understanding of the world. Every new tool, every observation about plant growth, every journey across unfamiliar land contributed to a growing foundation of knowledge. Yet the essential rhythm of daily life still remained recognizable. Morning light still awakened camps scattered across forests, plains, and coastlines. People still walked through the land searching for food and materials needed to sustain their communities. Evenings still gathered families around fires whose warmth illuminated faces and